speaking of hearing from our listeners, Scott, I didn't think we'd have enough time, but we've got a little time. We had a couple of questions in the YouTube chat that I'd like to get to. Again, one is from Waldo that we love hearing from him. He asked some good questions. This is not really related to what we've been talking about much of tonight per se, except for kind of the front office aspect. But he asks, without any extension we know of for Marvin Lewis, and I'm going to segue real quick. Obviously, we've talked about the fact that Lewis alluded to that he's in previous weeks, he's been talking with the front office about a possible extension once again to remain the coach after this season. This is the last year of his current deal. So without any extension we know from Marvin Lewis, is this Mike Brown telling us that there will be a change if things don't get better? I'm assuming things don't get better this year is what Waldo means. What do you think, Scott? Scott, you're muted.
Okay, I'll try that again.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There you are. There's that beautiful voice.
I had this wonderful answer muted, so I'm just going to give like the really lame answer.
You're going to half-ass it?
Just imagine whatever I said, whatever you didn't hear was a much better answer. Basically, awesome. I think fans can dream. You want to think Marvin Lewis is going to be gone. You think D'Amato Pecco, Ray Maluga, granted, we thought the same thing with Nugent, and that finally did happen. So I think we can dream big until they enter the season without Lewis not having another year. I just don't have enough faith in Mike Brown to say, yes, he's going to expect production. As much as I don't want to say that, I just the track record seems to be there as far as hanging on to guys we really shouldn't be hanging on to. And it's almost like, the Marvin Lewis thing, it's kind of like the guy saying, have you done anything bad? Oh, no, I'm a pretty good guy. I haven't killed anybody. Okay, you haven't killed anyone, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're a good person. I mean, you could be doing a lot of other stuff. There's kind of a wide range between, being St. Francis and, Jeffrey Dahmer, Adolf Hitler, whatever. There's, just because you haven't, committed genocide or mass murder doesn't mean, you're exactly, St. Francis. You could, and that tends to be what the Bengals do. It's like, well, yeah, he's not horrible. We win half our games, and that's pretty decent. And I just haven't seen anything from Mike Brown to indicate they're willing to take that next step, unless, like you said, someday when he does step down, either, obviously you don't want to wish anyone to die, but if he does die, or if he just says, hey, I'm old enough, I'm done with this, I'm retiring, Katie Blackburn, you take over, maybe at that point we could see a change. But other than that, I think it's hard for, old dogs learn new tricks. So I would be very surprised if that's the case.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, unfortunately, this has been a question, and not to disparage Waldo in his question here, but this is just a question that has come up a lot over the past handful of years when Lewis has signed these 1 or 2 year extensions, these little small deals to remain with the club. And as they've continued to make the playoffs over the past couple of years, the team kind of says, well, hey, he's in a sense doing his job. He's getting the team to the postseason. I understand it. I understand his tenure with the club and them continuing to extend him in a couple of fronts. Number one is, we've talked about this on the show before, the continuity aspect. Some of the best teams in the NFL have long tenured head coaches, but those are head coaches who have been to and or won a Super Bowl. And Lewis isn't there. And if you look at his overall record, and not even really counting his playoff record, he's slightly above average. And he's probably a top 12 coach maybe in the NFL, depending on how you rank him. But we've said this almost ad nauseum. Lewis has done a lot of good things for this team, a lot of good things for the city of Cincinnati. He's brought respectability to him, but He might just be nothing more than a Marty Schottenheimer, a guy that can rebuild a terrible team, make them competitive, get them relatively far, but he can't win the big games. And unfortunately, that's kind of been a stigma of Marvin Lewis in his tenure as head coach here. Given his overall record and his postseason record, I would be hard pressed to find, aside from maybe the Browns or the Jaguars or somebody, I would be hard pressed to find many other teams in the current NFL where if Lewis were to leave, well, let me backtrack. I would be hard pressed to find a team who had a coach that long with that type of record, that type of postseason record, who would continue to be in control of this team as head coach. Now, I think it's all about the working relationship Marvin Lewis and Mike Brown have. I think Mike Brown saw the coaching carousel that he went through after his father died and all of the quarterback issues that followed that. And Marvin Lewis, one of the things he's been able to do is find productive quarterbacks and long-term solutions. Now, they may not be the absolute best or fan favorites, whether it's Carson Palmer or Andy Dalton. He's really stabilized that position for this team, which was a major issue since Boomer Esiason left. So to answer Waldo's question, in my opinion, Scott, I think you've got some further thoughts, but to answer my question, I don't think it signals that. I think anybody who has a logical sense of football and how teams should operate should say, look, Marvin, we've given you a lot of benefits of the doubt over the years. This is it, man. I mean, you've done a lot of good things. We appreciate it, but we're stuck in neutral. That's my take, Scott.
Yeah, I think the best analogy, and this just came to me, I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, but for anyone who's read the Lord of the Rings books, or at least seen the movies, I assume some of our fans, some of the followers of Cincy Jungle and who follow this podcast have seen the movies. The Bengals are Minas Tirith, which is the big city in the third movie near the end when they had the big battle outside, for those who don't know the name. Marvin Lewis is Denethor. He is the steward of Gondor. He's the guy that I'm doing a decent job. I'm holding down the fort. It's better than having chaos. It's better than the city falling into disrepair. I've built the walls a little bit. Trash is being taken out. But you're not really doing anything. You're kind of letting the enemy, build up outside the gates. You're just kind of sitting there, twiddling your thumbs. You're kind of keep them with the same old, what we're doing is good enough. And it's not good enough. Like you said, you need the king. You need to return the king to come and fix things. And he's just not that guy. He is nothing more than the steward who's kind of sitting there, just kind of making sure, things are done to a point, but doesn't have the ability to get any farther. And I think that's the one frustration, is that no one is making that change to say, hey, this is nice that we have, but you just can't live with nice, because, those orcs aren't just going to sit around because we have nice. They're going to keep storming the gates until we do something about it.
Yeah, kind of almost false prophet-ish. A guy who came in and a lot of people thought would resurrect the team, kind of did, and to an extent, but not to the extent now that a lot of fans want. I like that we're geeking out here, Scott. You're talking about Lord of the Rings, because I don't know if you saw the title of this episode. It's a title of a Star Wars episode. It's called A New Hope, is what I titled it. So hopefully I don't hear from George Lucas or Lucasfilm or anything like that in terms of cease and desist order or anything like that.
Well, this was episode 4 and not episode 29.
There you go. Oh, gosh, I like where your head's at. We're going to do one more question and then wrap it up, Scott. We had one more. And before we get to it, Ryan Jones in the YouTube chat says, I see Marvin Lewis as a defensive coach, like lineman or secondary coach, not an offensive one, or maybe, and he didn't mention head coach, but maybe a lot of people feel that he is an excellent coordinator, not necessarily an evaluator of talent, not necessarily a head coach. So one more, and it was from, let's see here. It was from Nick Marks. Has the Darrelle Revis story and time since Adam Jones's issue kind of quelled some of the criticism or I don't know. I guess criticism of the Adam Jones situation. And for those who aren't familiar, Darrelle Revis, I believe it was last Saturday late night / Sunday morning. He was walking. He was with the Jets. He signed a lucrative deal there, in a series of lucrative deals he's signed over the past couple of years. He's from Pittsburgh. He went to Pitt for college. He was in downtown Pittsburgh walking past 2 a.m. by himself in a downtown area, not known as the best area of Pittsburgh. Obviously, you would think Saturday night, Sunday morning, he was probably out on the town doing whatever, but he was by himself, which is kind of weird. A couple of young men approached him and asked him if he's Darrelle Revis from the Jets. He said yes. These guys then proceeded to videotape him on their cell phones and kind of, I don't want to say harass him, but kind of asked him questions and talked to him. Long story short, Revis got in some sort of fight with these two young men, along with another bystander that came to Revis's aid. The two young men who initially approached Revis ended up getting knocked out. Revis took one of their cell phones, threw it in the street, and destroyed it to I guess, in an attempt to eliminate the video there. And now Revis is facing, I believe, 4 charges, including 3 felonies, something to that effect. Some big-time stuff. Obviously, that's kind of headline news, but it's kind of interesting because another AFC cornerback, another veteran guy who's up there in age, coming off a disappointing season. There's a lot of parallels with this. So this is new, Scott. This is relatively new, whereas Jones's situation was right after New Year's. I guess, does this lessen what happened with Jones earlier in the year in terms of severity? I don't know. How do you align these two instances?
I think to me they seem like totally different animals, and only because with the Revis thing, it just seems like they're trying to bait him. And we've seen this happen in pro sports before, didn't it? I think it happened with maybe was it Benson a few years ago when down in Texas?
Yep, it's a great
where
call.
The same kind of thing happened, and when you are a big name and you do have money, it's interesting and it's kind of interesting how they asked him. If he had said no, they probably would have kept on going. But since he said yes, I am Darrelle Revis, like, oh, okay. And you mentioned they get their cell phones out because you're trying to record this because and I haven't heard this happening so much recently as it seemed to be more of a big thing a few years ago, where you'd be at a club or something and you would kind of keep on harassing a person, kind of egging them on, and then they finally take the bait. They finally have had enough. They strike back, and then you get the video evidence, and then you press charges, and you try to get them to settle out of court so you can get some money from them. And it just seems like a big setup, which is very unfortunate because granted, you can say you can argue against Revis, well, you shouldn't be doing that. But at the same point, when you're being set up, you're kind of how far is the point where you say enough's enough? I really wish these guys weren't doing this crap, and which seems to be very different than the Adam Jones thing, where the Adam Jones was, as soon as that came out, everyone's like, we need to cut this guy. He's just a bad dude. It wasn't so much that people were trying to entice him into doing something.
I agree with you on that. It's kind of the thing to me, especially when Revis is and has been one of the most highest paid players in the NFL. What are you doing out walking around the streets at that time of night and that on the weekend? What are you doing? More so, what are you doing by yourself at that time of night? Why aren't you taking a cab, an Uber to get home? And this is a guy, I think Revis is now 30, and not that, that's old. I'm going to at least not date ourselves here, Scott, by saying that. Not that that's old, but he's been in the league for a long time. This isn't a 22-year-old guy who is just coming into his second season and maybe gets in a scrape. This is a guy who definitely should know better. And I don't understand the circumstances. I totally agree with the provocation aspect. And I think that's the main difference between, at least from details, and granted, we're all kind of ignorant to both of these because we weren't there. We don't know exactly what happened. But We've heard details, be it through police reports, news outlets, things like that in both of these cases. And it seemed to me that Jones was a little bit more of the aggressor in some of these situations, whereas Revis was kind of a bit more of a retaliator. Now, does that make him a much better person, or does it make his situation better than Jones's? Not necessarily. It just, there's a little bit of differences that need to be settled out here. And Scott, just kind of to talk about the point about stuff we've talked about with Adam Jones, Sean Steele in our YouTube chat says, I think we need to move on from Jones, honestly. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I know we've talked about that on this show. Still some more stuff to play out with Jones. Obviously some more stuff to play out with Revis. I think if they remain with the clubs, or if they get cut by either club, I think they're both probably looking at some league discipline. And whether they stay with their team or if someone else picks them up, that's something that they're going to have to deal with.
As far as these Revis goes, I think you mentioned one of the key things earlier when you were talking about why would he be out. Well, if he's from Pitt, went to Pitt, you kind of get a sense of your hometown area. That
makes sense.
And it could have, when he's 20, 25 years old, when he's in college, when he's a young guy, these probably the same area he went through. Hey, I know this area. I know the neighborhood. I never felt, any problems here when I was a young kid. So you go back years later and there's some times where, you just don't do that. If it's not a nicer neighborhood, there's some situations where, there's some places like when you're college age or younger that you run around because, obviously no one's real. It's just a different environment. You don't know how much that area's changed in those years. You're obviously a bigger target now than when you're, some little, 20-year-old kid running around. And so my guess is it must have been something like that where it's something he felt familiar with. Yeah, I used to go through all the time when I was a kid. There's no big deal.
I agree. I totally feel you. But again, when he was 20, 21 years old, he didn't have, $50 million in the bank.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I totally agree. It's his hometown. He's familiar, all of that stuff. But at the same time, you got to know, and right or wrong, I think, I think people are wrong, just personally speaking. I think people are wrong to idolize athletes, and everybody's human. Everybody makes mistakes. I think you probably got to know what you're doing at that time of night, where you are, who you are in terms of stature and being able to be easily recognized. Maybe the best course of action would have just been, are you Darrelle Revis? No, I'm not. And the whole situation would have been quelled at that point. But both very interesting scenarios with Adam Jones and Darrelle Revis. A lot of parallels, some differences. Obviously, both guys are facing a bit of trouble, whether it's by the legal system or from the NFL office, or both. So interesting to see. And we'll continue to update, obviously, both on Cincy Jungle and on this show, what happens with Adam Jones. And who knows? I mean, obviously, Jones's thing happened earlier than what happened with Revis. So maybe, there's a precedent set there in terms of NFL punishment. If Jones gets charged with certain things, or however the courts rule there, vice versa with Revis, just kind of depends. But we'll keep an eye on that. That was a good question.